When the national polls favor a Republican or look this close for a Democrat, that spells doom for Democrats. If you're like me and you've been following politics for decades, you've probably grown accustomed to a certain trend that happens in the polls right around now. In the final couple of weeks of a campaign, you'll hear it from the experts on cable news and political shows on the networks. They'll say the polls are tightening. The polls are tightening. What does that mean? The polls are tightening. For decades, I've been watching this happen, where for months and months and months during an election, they'll show Democrats up by 5, up by 6, up by 10. And then when you get into the final weeks of the campaign, the polls tighten, which means Republicans suddenly start showing up and looking better on the polls. Now, how is that possible? Is it because that Republicans just don't say they're going to vote for the Republican? Does it mean that voters lie and say they're going to vote for the Democrat and then they really tell the truth in the final weeks of the campaign? Is it because people suddenly change their mind and they say, nope, I told you I was going to vote for a Democrat, but now I'm going to vote for a Republican? Is it because the pollsters all of a sudden start calling different people and they suddenly stumble upon people who were always going to vote for Republicans? We just never talked to them until now. Or is it because those undecideds all suddenly at the last minute decide to go Republican? Does any of that make sense? No, none of it makes sense. Well, if you're like me, as I said, and you've been paying attention and you've been consuming talk radio and political analysis for the last several decades, well, you will remember Rush Limbaugh telling you exactly what happens in the final weeks of a campaign. What happens is these pollsters all start changing their samples, changing their turnout models, and changing the actual demographics of the way they weight these polls so that it's not so heavily favored for Democrats anymore. The conversations are the same, the phone calls are the same, the response is the same, but now they re-weight the polls to show Republicans in a more favorable light. Why? Well, because they're trying to hedge their bets. They want to make sure that they can say after the election, well, we saw trends going in the Republicans' direction. You see, up until now, most of the polls are designed to drive a media narrative, to make Democrats feel good, and to try to make it seem inevitable that the Democrats are going to win. Otherwise, how else do you explain? How else do you explain decades of the same thing happening over and over again? Oh, the polls are tightening. The polls are tightening. Suddenly, Republicans are looking pretty good. 8 years ago, at this time, Hillary Clinton was leading in the national poll by like 3-4 points. And in the battleground states, in the Electoral College, she was up by like 4 or 5 points in all of the states. And then suddenly, Trump comes out of nowhere and wins Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And if you look, the final days right before Election Day, suddenly Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania suddenly were within 1 or 2 points. Clinton and Trump were. And then he ended up winning. All right, that entire intro brings us to the latest poll numbers. Let's start with the national poll. And I know we don't pay a lot of attention to the national polls because that's not how we elect presidents in America. We elect presidents based on a state-by-state poll. But when the national polls favor a Republican or look this close for a Democrat, that spells doom for Democrats. Remember, only twice since 1988 has a Republican won the presidency and won the popular vote. That would be George Herbert Walker Bush in 88 and George W. Bush in 2004. So if a Republican is doing well in the national poll, that's a big story for Democrats. A big bad story. So here's the latest Real Clear Politics average, and you can see Kamala Harris right now is sitting at 49.2%. Trump is at 48.3%, within 1 percentage point on the Real Clear Politics average. That's terrible news for Kamala Harris. Also terrible news. Look at this red line here on this graph. You see how it's going up in the final last few weeks of the beginning of October? That's the trend for Trump. Notice how Kamala Harris is almost, flatline. Hasn't changed, about the same. But you see, what did I tell you? All the breaking right now, the people that are breaking in the final weeks, they're all breaking for Trump. Let's look at this other breakdown here. This is from Real Clear Politics. Trend lines are important. That average number that I just showed you is an average of all of these polls you're looking at. How many is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 polls that they averaged out to give you that number, which is Kamala Harris at 0.9% of a lead in the average. But see, the most important part of this, the 5 most recent polls are at the top of this graph here, the top of this spreadsheet. Look at 4 of the 5 are all trending in Trump's favor. In fact, that bottom one, the one in the middle here that shows Trump +2, that's a Fox News poll from October 11th, right? So what? That's only 10 days ago. If you look at the polls from October 11th through today, 4 of the last 5 are all trending for Trump. Fox News +2, Rasmussen +2, Emerson shows Harris +1, then Tip, Trump +2, Atlas Intel, Trump +3. That is an unbelievably strong trend line in the last 2 weeks, all trending for Donald Trump. But it gets even more important because of those top 5 polls that I just showed you, take a look at this graph from Real Clear Politics. Now, what this does is it grades these pollsters based on their accuracy. All right. And this averages the 2016 presidential election and the 2020 presidential election, one in which Trump won, one in which Biden won. And Reuters, Rasmussen, Tip, Fox, and NBC News were rated the top 5 polls in error rate. See how this column says average error? And only in Rasmussen and Tip did the errors favor Republicans. All the other ones, if they had an error, favored Democrats. So of the top 5, Tom Bevan at Real Clear Politics broke this out. The top 5 most accurate national pollsters from 2016 and 2020. This is how they currently see the race. Reuters still sees Harris +3, but we're waiting for a Reuters poll coming out today or tomorrow. They're a little late with their latest poll. Rasmussen, Tip, Fox News, and NBC. Those are the other 4 of the top 5 accurate pollsters. And 3 of those 4 show Trump in the lead. NBC News shows it as a tie. Are you tracking with me here? Not only is this now within 1 percentage point in terms of the national popular vote, but also 4 of the last 5 national popular vote polls show Trump in the lead. And of those, 3 of them are the most accurate polls from the last 2 election cycles. So we're pretty confident that these numbers are coming in accurately. That's how your national numbers look right now. But of course, we want to talk about the states. And right now, since I'm in Michigan for the next 2 weeks at Hillsdale College, as you can see, Steve Karnecki on Meet the Press did a breakdown on how Michigan is looking right now because both Trump and Harris had their campaigns in Michigan over the last 48 hours, and they're going to be spending a lot more time here in the next 2 weeks. So what is Michigan looking like? Watch Steve break it down.
And look, this is our running average of the polling averages in the battleground states. They're all close, but what's the closest right now? Look at that. Michigan, the average there. Harris by 1/10 of 1 point. Really doesn't get closer than that. So let's dive into Michigan, what we're going to be looking at in the home stretch and on election night. And the key thing with Michigan, of course, go back to the last election. You just heard from Barack Obama there. Before Donald Trump came on the scene, Barack Obama and the Democrats won Michigan handily. Trump, of course, flipped it barely in 2016, and then it moved a little bit back to the Democrats in 2020. But the key is between 2012 and 2020, the Trump era, the state as a whole got a lot less Democratic. So keeping that in mind, we've split it into 3 categories here. Take a look. One way to think about it. One is, despite the state getting less Democratic, there are 9 counties that got more Democratic in the Trump era. Look at this. From 2012, Barack Obama won this collection of counties by 6. By 2020, it was a 14-point Biden blowout. There's only 9 of them, but they are 1/3 of the state. Each one of these has a higher share of white voters with college degrees than the statewide average. We talk about that a lot as the core Democratic base these days. You see it in these counties you got highlighted here. Next year, these are places where Trump made gains between 2012 2016 and where he held those gains in 2020. And you do see geographically, it's a fair amount of the state, but population-wise, this is only 15% of the state. Some of the movement in some of these counties isn't that significant, but in others, talk about like Genesee County, where Flint is, Democrats were winning by 30 when Obama was the candidate. Now the Democratic margin down to like 10. Can Trump squeeze more out of this population-wise relatively small share of the state? And then this is half the state in terms of where the vote is. These are places where Trump made gains, sometimes big gains in 16, then lost ground in 2020. This, I think, is where the state's going to be won or lost. Look at like Saginaw County here, where the city of Saginaw is. This is sort of a core, swing county. We're going to talk a lot about that on election night. You've got just outside Detroit, Macomb County, the old blue collar, big suburbs of Detroit. Obama won them. Trump won them by double digits in 2016, then gave back ground in 2020. That's a key one. And then the city of Detroit itself in Wayne County, the biggest in the state. Within Wayne County, we're going to be looking at, the city of Detroit and the city of Dearborn. In Detroit, Democrats worried about black voter support, black male voter support for Biden. Going to see Detroit will be a measure of that. In Dearborn, a large Muslim population. We're going to be looking on election night. Is that Israel-Palestine situation affecting the vote there, Kristen?
All right. So all of that broken down, and it's a smart way to break down the state, and Michigan is going to loom large. Let me just be clear, because I have roots in Michigan. I know people in Michigan. They've been following Michigan. It shouldn't be close. They have a Democrat machine in this state. They've got abortion issues on the state ballot all the time. Gretchen Whitmer and the Secretary of State have engineered drop boxes and all of these election protocols and all these things that are absolutely a nightmare for people concerned about election integrity. They have been able to drive the narrative the Democrats have in this state in every election cycle. There's no reason why it should be this close. Michigan should be off the map right now for Donald Trump. And yet it is in a whisker difference right now between the two of them. And having just landed in Detroit and driven from Detroit to where Hillsdale College is, which is about 90 miles southwest of Detroit, I can tell you personally, you land in Detroit, you expect to see Kamala Harris, dear leader posters everywhere, like the Obama Hope thing, and it's like plastered everywhere. Barely anything. I'll be honest. I was in Detroit, Romulus, Wayne County, what Steve Kornacki was just pointing at, and driving out of the state to Ann Arbor, which is very liberal because it's a college town. You don't see a lot of Harris signs. I'm sure they're all voting for Kamala Harris, but you don't see a lot of presence there. The second you get about 15 to 20 miles outside of Detroit, where we were driving on the roads heading out to where Hillsdale College is, nothing but Trump. Nothing but Trump. Huge. In fact, about 20 miles outside of Hillsdale, there was a pop-up store. You know how before July 4th, they have fireworks stands, for the weeks leading up to July 4th, where you can buy your fireworks, if it's legal in the state that you live in. There was a pop-up stand, a store selling Trump shirts, selling Trump flags, selling MAGA hats, selling Trump paraphernalia on a street corner in the town. That's the energy right now as soon as you get out of Detroit. There's no reason that it should be this way, except for the fact that there is momentum right now for Donald Trump. And I want to leave you with one last thing. Whether it's Pennsylvania or Michigan or Wisconsin, understand, to win the Electoral College and be the next president, Donald Trump only has to win one of them. Kamala Harris has to do a clean sweep. If she loses all three, if she loses any one of them, it's over for her.